Caitlin McFarland, and this is Emily Gibson, and we're the co-founders of ATX Television Festival, and we're pretty stoked to welcome you to a very exciting event for ATX TV, our first virtual reunion. If you're familiar with us, we kind of have a thing for nostalgia.
Yes, we might like living in the past sometimes, especially right now, and there's just so much good TV that we can't accept when it's over. So we just keep bringing the goodness back, and tonight is no exception.
I guess the other thing to say is that we really like cult classics, niche, small shows that find audiences as they age, and this Canadian classic is no different. We've finally got Slings and Arrows, and it is presented with our new partners, Acorn TV. You can watch the whole series there now. Well, not right now, but we've got a 30-day free trial code, which is SLINGS, for you to continue watching.
Yes, but don't go there just yet, because here's what we're going to do. We're all going to watch the pilot together momentarily, right here, right now, so you don't have to go anywhere.
But after tonight, go to Acorn TV, watching the whole show again or discovering it for the first time.
As soon as we're done watching the pilot, we normally don't encourage any sort of talking during watching TV, but tonight we do have the YouTube chat going, so please join us as we chat through watching it together.
Yeah. So after the episode finishes, you still don't have to go anywhere else. You're going to be joined by the incredible Emily Nussbaum, someone we might be geeking out for just as much as the Slings and Arrows gang. Sorry, guys. We've been trying to get her to the ATX Festival for quite some time. She will introduce the cast and creators and all the multi-hyphenated, talented folks that made this beloved series.
Before we go, we also want to thank your friend and supporter, Loretta Ramos, for being the greatest wrangler of all time who made this happen. She is a rock.
Yes, she is. She truly pulled it all together and brought us the additional help of Acorn TV, who made the screening possible. So with that, let's start the show.
Hello.
Hello.
G'day.
Welcome.
Hello, beautiful.
For shizzle.
What?
For sure.
You're chasing a murderer.
Why do you think you can just run off on your own?
Because I'm carrying a gun.
We're here for you.
Sorry to drag you out a bit.
Oh, I'll forgive you.
No, 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 no!
Careful, your depth perception will have altered. You'll get used to it.
So let's just dive right in, shall we? My name is Geoffrey Tennant, and I've been asked to come and help celebrate the life of Oliver Wells.
Geoffrey, is this a crazy thing? Or do we have a connection?
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Well, Macbeth.
What is the point of putting on a play if no one comes to see it?
You know, you should really clean yourself up.
I'm going to assume that you're a ghost, Oliver.
Sounds like he's haunting you.
Geoffrey, I am upset.
Two of you are trapped in these roles, much like that.
Shut up!
No,
Wherefore art thou, Romeo?
It's really poetic, but it's really, sexual.
I don't know what to say. That was incredible!
Great show.
Thanks. We could use a little madness around here.
Geoffrey?
What?
You have no idea how frightening it is to watch you talking to an empty chair.
Welcome to the Slings and Arrows Reunion. This is a huge thrill, and to be completely candid, I primarily took this moderation gig so that I would have an excuse to watch the show for the fourth time. I've been a television critic for more than a decade, and I hate top 10 lists, and I'm always complaining about them, but I finally just gave up and acknowledged that this is my favorite show. It's incredibly moving, funny, dramatic. It's all of the things. As everyone here knows, because you're attending this, Slings and Arrows ran from 2003 to 2006. It's set at the New Burbage Shakespeare Festival, which is definitely not the Stratford Festival. And it's a comedy, a drama, a romance, and a blind item. At once a scathing takedown and a very emotional glorification of what it means to live your life in the theater. It's just as moving and funny every time I watch it. And I'm going to introduce my guests, Canada's Best Hams, who are going to appear in these little squares here. One by one, I'll just say, first of all, Susan Coyne, who is the co-creator of the show, one of the writers, 3 writers for the show, and the actress who played Anna in the show. Bob Martin, another one of the co-creators of the show and co-writers of the show, as well as Terry, the corporate guy who extremely touchingly read the monologue from Hamlet. Mark McKinney, the 3rd co-creator and co-writer of the show, as well as Richard. And Paul, I'm not sure whether Paul is here, but Paul Gross plays the magnificent Geoffrey in the show. I'm not sure whether he's here or whether he's going to appear a little later. Martha Burns, who plays the fabulous Ellen. Welcome. Martha?
Yeah.
Okay, pull you in. And Luke Kirby, who gave a tremendous performance as Jack in season 1. So Luke, come on down.
Hello.
Hello, welcome. So we found Paul. Paul,
Yes.
Paul Gross, please explain where you were during the last session.
I was in the Badlands in southern Alberta, and I was on horseback with a friend of mine who's a rancher and my daughter, and we thought we had left a lot of time, but actually didn't. So we were racing across the prairie trying to get back, and then I realized there's just no way. Because there was no reception at the horse trailer. So
were you guys literally galloping across the Badlands?
Yeah. Flying across, because Martha had called. There was no reception where we were, and then we got up top, and then I thought, oh, what? No. So we were, we didn't make it though, obviously.
It is fun, but like it's just like an excellently dramatic way to try to make a Zoom interview, because these things are so odd and airless that it
would have been really great if I made it to the horse trailer and we had to do it on a phone in and around the horses. But anyway.
That's true. You could have just held up, and the horses could have been part of it. So for starters, I just want to ask you all, looking back on the show, what was the point where you really knew that this was something that was going to click? Because, although it was described in the introduction there as a niche show, to me, this is sort of an all-encompassing show that is not really a matter of like a tiny achievement, but is something that sort of has things to say about television in general. I wondered at what point, it could be something while you were writing or while you were performing it, or once it came out, that felt like the moment that you knew you were onto something. So let's start with.
I think it's when you're well, first of all, it took quite a while to get actually made, and it really felt, if I may say, that it was never going to get made. So when it got picked up, it was sort of, it all happened sort of suddenly, very quickly, and we were into production with something we'd been working on for 5 years. So you don't really have time to think about, is this working? Is this, and I think actually that's partly what made it really special, because we were kind of just moving forward blindly, and we had this amazing cast. I mean, I have to say that once you start seeing people performing, you think, oh, there is something magical here. But until it all comes together, it's all sort of by the seat of your pants in some way. And then, it's afterwards you think, well, this is coming together, isn't it? It's a funny thing. Also, we were making a show about theater, and we never knew if it would find an audience or not. We thought, well, it might be too insidery. I mean, we're very, very cognizant of trying to make it something that everybody could relate to, but you just never know whether people will be interested in actors, Shakespeare, theater.
Are we all supposed to just jump in and contradict Susan?
Yeah.
Good.
Why not?
I won't contradict. But for me, it was the crew, the way the crew embraced the show, especially after that first tumultuous season. Like the first season was extremely difficult to shoot. Our budget was slashed dramatically before we began shooting, and we took a long time to find our footing, and it was just difficult. But despite all of that hardship, the crew was so possessive. Like they were so proud of it as a product. And they talked about it in these glowing terms. And that makes it, because often when you're on a set, the crew can possibly care less about what you're doing. But everybody just really, really embraced our show. And that was kind of beautiful.
Also, I remember that
we were shooting, and you'd always see Scotty, the focus puller, his shoulders would be shaking. The camera crew, you would always just see them kind of vibrating in the background when they were trying so hard not to laugh, and that was one of my favorite things. Or also just the idea that it was like, okay, hey, I guess I guess we're doing okay here.
Mark, did you have a moment that you felt?
I'm not a big fan, so I'll pass.
Fair enough.
No, I think what made it exciting for me, and this was early on, though it's not quite, we've got a hit. But when Susan came up with the idea to have a ghost, and it was kind of like a chunk that was needed to make it magical. Like we'd already expanded it from a half hour to an hour, because The Sopranos was in the air, and suddenly the potential of our TV and miniseries was just hit a new dimension. And but that was kind of like the great leap forward. But then again, it was months. But I would say it's almost, I have a similar story to Martha, which is talking to Rudy, our DOP, and he was kind of a quiet guy, and just seeing this kind of so what do you think, Rudy? We're doing another. You're kidding me? It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Wow.
Luke?
I was a turnip, I was really fresh off of the cart. And so my impression was that anything that was being put onto film was bound to be a great success, because I thought that's just how the business worked. So I just assumed we had a hit on our hands just by virtue of the fact that I was working. But there was something else going on, which was that I was sort of immersed into this cast of people that I had grown up watching and admiring, on television, with Mark, with the kids in the hall being hugely influential to just, me as a kid, not as a performer per se, but just in a worldview way. And then all of the actors that were, that I'd watched growing up, going to Stratford, and, Stephen Ouimet to me, going to Stratford was like watching Stephen Ouimet or Tom McCamus was like, it was like watching, The Clash or something, because they jolted the whole energy of that place in a way that was so exciting. So it was sort of, it felt like a big welcome. And then, of course, Bob was in my favorite episode of the Edison Twins, but we have to save that for another.
Oh, there's so many young actors that I touched with my performance.
It's those squeeze
as
bottles.
The creepy neighbor, I believe.
It's the mustard bottles.
That's right. Oh my God. That's hilarious.
Was there a point when you were making it where you really felt like you guys were on to something good, where it clicked for you? And it could be a performance thing, or reading it, or just some moment in scene footage of it where you just felt like this is particularly powerful.
No. No, quite the reverse, actually. I don't know. It was such an odd piece. I mean, I always thought that it would be of interest to a lot of people who aren't even interested in the theater, because it's really a workplace show, and that everybody has some familiarity with. It's just a workplace show with more people. So I thought that it might work, but we also were working so fast. We were not hindered by the amounts of money. Just every day was we're going through a lot of material, and so there wasn't around to kind of reflect on it. But I do remember points of thinking, well, that scene was great, or that felt really fun, or watching somebody else do something and think, oh, that's terrific. But no, I never had that sense that it would work. And we thought we would like it, be proud of it, but it wouldn't really particularly take off. So it's been completely surprising that everyone found it. Mm. And I would like to say then we all knew it was only a matter of time. I don't think most of us knew that.
So, Susan, just to go back to what you were saying about it being an incredibly long process putting it together, tell me a little bit about the story of that, because it started in 97, 98, as you said, as a half-hour thing, and it was more of a comedy at that time. And I know at one point it was it was called St. Ratford, and at another point there was a murder mystery involved. Like, what was and I've always been curious about that murder.
I don't remember the murder, but we thought St. Ratford was a tiny bit on the nose. Since it's not about Stratford at all. So we did start as a half hour, and I have to say I'd never written anything for television before. And so I think I started working with Mark, who had worked in television and had a great deal more sort of perspective. And it was Mark that said it should be an hour. And then we needed the third element of Bob coming in. It sort of all came together in a kind of a remarkable way when the three of us got together, and it just sometimes that's the best kind of. I think a threesome is a really good way to go with especially with us, the different background we had. I have the theater background, and the two of you have so much comedy background. It needed that moment to gel, I think, with the three of us. I don't know. It's a mysterious thing. The kind of what makes a writing team work, but that's when it all, we seem to have the team we needed at that point.
I know you've talked about what it was like. It seems like a very unusual kind of writing room. You were all around your kitchen table, I understand.
Unusual. My dog was part of it. Rest in peace.
Brand new.
Yeah.
We ran everything by him.
Just on a pragmatic level, like with the three of you writing it, I know you've talked about having really outlined it in enormous detail. What was the pragmatic way you did this? Did you use cards or software? Did you each play different roles? Was one of you guys more structural and one more emotional? Like, how did you hash it out, especially at the beginning when you didn't know quite what the show?
I've been in a real writing room. I understand that's how things work, but we were a little different.
We spent most of our time complaining about our lives.
That's true.
And then at some point began organizing the material.
Yeah.
And we would assign, as I recall, once we broke down the season, when we started sort of the macro and moved in, so we would outline the entire season roughly in 3-act form, and then break down each hour in 3-act form, and assign episodes to outline. Each person got 1 or 2 episodes to outline. As a matter of fact, did we divide up the season by acts as well?
Yeah.
I can't remember now. Like, did I do the first act and then you guys?
Movie.
Yeah. And then yeah, we just kept honing in closer and closer to get the production draft.
But just to add to that, I would say that the most of the time we took a play and we talked a lot about the play and what the themes of the play were for us. And so that's where we started from, is what could our characters be doing to mirror what was happening in the play. So and it may seem silly, but we decided that Macbeth was kind of about a midlife crisis. So everybody, and it was all about, what do you do? Can a artistic director change? It was all about people confronting, where Martha's character was being audited and having to confront her the way she was living her life. One of my favorite details, that whole storyline. So it was very much heavily informed by what play we were doing as well.
And you had decided from the beginning that the first season was going to be Hamlet.
Yes.
And then Martha, when you came in on this, how did they describe your role to you?
I think it might have been Neve Fishman was the producer who first described the role, and then I think sort of trying to convince me that that like that they would make me look really beautiful, and they that one and that I think it was just more like a because I'd never played a lead on television. I'd only done guest spots here and there. I think it was more. I think Liv tried to convince me that I could be this person, I mean, maybe also because maybe he definitely, I guess, not seeing my bitchy side at that point. I guess he'd always just thought of me being really nice. So, yeah, that's really that's what I remember. Maybe I'll remember something by the time I hear some more memories.
I remember when we were writing it, like sometimes a single line of dialogue brings a character into focus. And for Ellen, it was, sorry for caring. That was what really made a clear portrait of that character for me.
I also think we had Martha in mind for like a long time because, you know, I mean, TV notwithstanding, you were kind of the queen of the Canadian stage, and you know, there were stories.
Just a lady in waiting only. But thank you. But it was just like the most fun part to play, and just got more and more fun as it went along. So it was a great treat. Thank you, guys. Now that you're all together.
This is a fairly straightforward question, but what was it like for you and Martha to play a couple? Like, I don't know whether their relationship had any relationship with your relationship, or whether
exactly the same.
But identical.
Identical. There's absolutely no. We just walked out of the house right in front of the camera.
Well, I just wondered, actually, I guess, you know, well, first of all, I'll just say this is a strange compliment, but I do find with real life couples, often there's this difficulty, peculiarly in capturing any kind of chemistry and real thing on screen. Sometimes you get real life couples playing roles and it doesn't come through. With you guys, this incredibly powerful, sparking relationship. I wondered how playing those characters affected your own relationship, or did you take stuff home? Did you talk about the roles at home, or did you make a split?
Yeah, I think both of us were kind of nervous about doing it because we don't do it that often. You know, we don't act together all that often. And I mean, ironically, we met acting, but we just didn't do it a lot. But it was really simple. I think there was just something in the way the relationship was written that it allowed for great coming together and passion, and it also allowed for the irritations that couples have, and the anger. And so it had enough of it that it wasn't, I think it would have been difficult if we were constantly, you know, enraptured with each other. I think that would have been hard to sustain. So it was nicely broken up with, I can't stand you, you know. And we did take it home. I thought we'd sort of, I seem to recall we made some kind of a pact that we wouldn't talk about it a lot at home, but of course it was fun to do, so we would come home. And also we weren't always in the same scenes, as you know, so we'd say, well, what happened in your stuff today? And then, oh, that sounds great. And so yeah, it was nice. And then I don't think we did anything together until we did Domesticated on stage together. That was hard. I mean, that was a lot more difficult. They are not having much fun together, those two.
This is one of my favorite scenes. It's one of many people's favorite scenes, and it is where Geoffrey is discussing the nature of how to perform madness to Ophelia. And it's just an incredibly, I mean, I've seen it a million times.
Isn't that beautiful? I love that scene, yeah.
It's so moving, and I always notice new things in it. I mean, it's beautiful, but it's also just powerful as an example of direction and certain ideas about internal life. And I was actually wondering about how you conceive the nature of Geoffrey's madness, and about your thoughts about playing that, and just that general question for yourself.
It's really an interesting question, because I never really, this probably is going to sound odd, I never really thought about it in those terms, like it was something in the DSM that I could sit down with a psychiatrist and talk about. And I think now looking back on it, I think that what happened really had to do, I had played Hamlet at Stratford, this theater in Ontario, not that long before we started shooting the show. And the experience of that, because I was inside Hamlet for about a year or longer, and we did 90 shows or something over the course of a whole long season. And I did go quite loopy doing it. I mean, some of it was just, you know, the general feelings of insufficiency, and I'm absolutely incapable of pulling this off. I should quit. In fact, I tried to quit after the first preview, I think, or dress rehearsal. I was crying and phoned the director, said, I can't do this. You know I can't do this. Call him Fior. He still remembers the lines. He'll go do it. And, but I mean, along the way of playing it, I got to the point where I was really paranoid, because you absorb all of these things that he has, because it just overwhelms you. You can't, it's not a part that you can leave anywhere. And I think everyone in this company is actually trying to kill me. All the other actors are trying to kill me. And then it kind of metastasized from there to the point that I was having these weird, I don't know I would call them hallucinations, but they weren't exactly like that. It was full blown and quite real. And I'd be on stage when this was happening. Like one of them, like as an example with How All Occasions Do Inform Against Me, I had this weird, I could see that I was in like a bar, an old tavern with the big beams and posts, and I could see Shakespeare at a long table with some food in front of him, and out of this middle of a conversation with other people, the speech came. I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably how it happened. It fell out of him, parts of it, and then he refined it. Because at the end of it, somebody said, well, that's quite good, Bill. Yes, it is. I must remember that. And then I'd be backstage. And then that got worse, because then I would black out. I don't mean faint or anything, but just disappear and kind of wake up in the middle of a scene and not really know where it was. It would take, and that was chilling, to go through this, to go through all of these things in front of 2,000 people is really kind of uncomfortable. But the person who saved me was Brent Carver, who recently died, but he had played Hamlet a couple of times, once at Stratford. And he was not in the company, but we would run into each other if we were switching over from the matinee to the evening. And he would say, how are you doing? And I'd say, oh, I don't trust anyone. He said, yeah, that's going to go on for a while. And then I said, now I'm blacking out. How long's that been going on? Like about a week and a half. He said, probably go about another week and you'll be okay. Yeah, and then I kind of was. So that's a very long-winded way to get back to say, when it came to Geoffrey's madness, it was just that stuff. It's all very real, but it's not in the DSM, I don't think. Does that make sense? So I know quite typically research involves going and talking to a psychiatrist, what does this actually, and then I sort of thought about them. That's kind of limiting. I think I know what it means to just be inside theater that makes you go somewhere else.
I mean, this is a beautiful story. It's incredibly powerful that somebody was able to walk you through it without saying it has to be a pathological thing. You have to get rid of it. Like, it's just basically, how do you ride this through?
Yeah. You just have to wait it out, and it will let you out of it eventually. And I think that was much of how the relationship, I actually think it made the relationship with Stephen Ouimet's character so genuine somehow. So I know you're here. I know you're not really here, but you are here. And I'll talk to you. And yeah, so it was really quite intense. It was intensely personal. So I didn't have to actually think of that much.
One of the most powerful scenes to me, especially early on, is when he tries to describe to Ophelia the question of playing madness. But one of the things I find so moving about the show is the role of mental illness in it and how it's portrayed. And I wondered, what kind of crazy do you see Geoffrey as in this? And how does that play a role in it? Like, did you think of it as a diagnosis, or was it more symbolic to you?
That's a very good question.
I think we had that conversation, and we're trying to present it because it's not a diagnosis, and it's very close to honestly what a lot of people have experienced when at the edge of creative intensity. I think you said, Bob, it's sort of a romantic version of mental illness, because we didn't want to be insensitive, but it is something I think a lot of people in our line of work have experienced moments, especially in the theater, where Daniel Day-Lewis, walking off stage playing Hamlet, because of the intensity of the experience. Stephen Fry. There are lots of actual real-life examples of people who've had, because it's sort of mentally dangerous at times to be doing this work. This is why people have all these rituals to keep the demons away. Because so that's sort of the world that we're in, where it's human. It's a thing that can happen to anybody in a certain kind of with a certain kind of temperament and with a certain intensity, with a lack of filters and a lack of ability, personal life, all those things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense to me. I mean, it's interesting because the ghost's role in all this is presented as like, do you think of the ghost as a real thing? And I know that it was your idea, Susan. Like, where did that come from?
The thing that interests me the most about theater is that things are real and not real at the same time. And it is the most fascinating thing. You can conjure up and you can really see that dagger in front of you, and at the same time you know it's not a dagger. You can be strangling Ophelia and acting, but of course you know you're not going to strangle the actress. I think that Ghost lives in exactly that world, where every theater that's worth its salt has a ghost, because it's all those imaginations coming together in some way. It's lingering, all those, and you walk into somebody else's set, whether it's in TV or theater, and you just look and it's a bunch of ratty old chairs. But to the people who are rehearsing, the chairs have become something else, and the table has become something else, and they can see the trappings. It's just such an interesting kind of weird. It's like children; things are real and not real at the same time, and that's to me the ghost is real and not real at the same time.
We did have rules that we tried to follow.
Yeah, exactly.
Except we violated those rules several times. Other people didn't see Oliver or hear Oliver, except that Oliver was able to open a cage and let an animal out in the apparently first season.
That's the pie throwing scene where Oliver freaks out in the kitchen and everybody gets a face full of blueberry pie. It was just a little bit of lightness.
but what, like, in terms of whether it was madness, really we kind of thought of it as a romanticized depiction of the creative process.
Right.
That Geoffrey is talking through whatever he's doing with another part of his personality that manifests itself as his dead mentor and torments him. So he's tormented by this other part of his consciousness. Having said all that, there is the character in season 2 who actually, final season. Who actually has a conversation with Oliver.
Mm-hmm.
But again, is that Geoffrey seeing that happening, or is it really happening? Is this Geoffrey applying meaning to what Oliver is, some portal to another dimension, or is this conversation actually happening? So we tried to be fairly ambiguous about it, and not have too many incidents that showed definitively that he was a spirit. Although that moment is the most, arguably tilts in one direction.
And it's like moving, exciting kind of breakthrough moment. What do you think Oliver's, it's an odd question, but what do you think Oliver's issue with Geoffrey was? I've always sort of wondered this, just because their backstory is suggested but not fully put forth. Like, was he in love with him?
I think so. I think there was that very much part of it. And also that he was to be the next one. And to redeem him from his sort of the hack quality that he'd fallen into. And some of bits and pieces of these characters are based on people we know from Stratford or from the Shaw Festival or other places. And so there are elements of it where I think, well, that's a little bit like this guy. And but I think it was that Oliver was there in a way to try to find his redemption. And Geoffrey had abandoned him and had to try to provide it. So they were in lockstep going through the various things that are so difficult. And funny.
Luke, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about playing Hamlet. And actually, I just wanted to directly ask you, like, when you were playing that role, I know there's a lot of things that are based on other things. Was any of it, were you playing Keanu Reeves to a certain extent? Because I know Keanu Reeves played Hamlet under the
I had heard a little bit about his doing it, but I didn't know the details of it. I wasn't really thinking about him too much. I was too invested in the make-believe. I mean, like I said, I was like in that very young place. It was a very heady time. I had just come back from Los Angeles for the first time. I'd gone and like, you know, done the rounds of meeting agents with promises of great futures. So I really felt like I was well on my way to becoming Jack Crew. But you know, the gods had other plans, but so I just sort of, yeah, I really felt like I'd gotten this bird's eye view of the landscape that he came from, and I came back home and yeah, just sort of got stoned and dove in.
I know a lot of you have talked about the fact that the first season was underfunded, done under a lot of pressure. It was the most chaotic season to put together. What was exactly going wrong? Like, can you tell me a specific story about something that was hard to put together the first season?
Well, you just talk about CBC dropping out.
Yeah, that was we were in a long development process with the CBC. God bless them. They just swept with Schitt's Creek. And you know, we've been going back literally for years, and at the 11th hour they dropped out. But we happen to have one of the most tenacious producers I've ever met in Richmond, who in his fury, I suspect, would not let it go. And I mean, the story about, maybe you or someone else knows more about it, but is that literally a day after we got dropped by the CBC, he found himself in an elevator with someone from, and managed to cobble together some sort of hybrid alliance of Canadian cable companies. None of
three networks. Yeah, in an elevator meeting. Yeah.
In an elevator, and but then I think it was like 700,000 Canadian per episode, and so that resulted in we had to block shoot. We had to shoot all the office scenes, and then all the this scenes and all of that scenes. And Bob, who was, I think, closer to the production, could probably tell you, you know, reusing paper cups and stuff like that.
Well, we just basically lost almost a third of our budget before we started shooting. So we had planned out the entire season with a certain figure in mind. And so the weeks before we started shooting, it was all meeting with Sari Freeland, the line producer, although she'd be mad at me for calling her a line producer. She'd be mad at me anyway. But it was like, what are we cutting? What are we cutting? What are we cutting? Like constantly. What are we reducing? And the conversations were hilarious. Like we had a scene with swans, these large swans on the river. I guess would have been the final episode of season 1. I can't remember.
Yes.
Well. Yes. Yeah.
And it was, we can afford one swan. We had 3 in the script. One, and it was like, why? If we're getting 1, why is it more expensive to have 2? It was you know, like ridiculous conversations. The most, for us watching the pilot, the most dramatic thing is the gift shop, because the gift shop was supposed to be the enormous representation of the commercialization of this theater, and it's all Richard's idea. The gift shop was a big part of the pilot episode and was reduced to a single table with a few t-shirts on it when we shot, because we couldn't afford to construct it. And we weren't shooting at Stratford, where there is an enormous gift shop, which is a whole other story.
Yeah, they declined to.
They declined.
But wait a second. So they declined to participate in this?
They declined to participate.
Talk a little bit about the role of Stratford and all this. Did you show them a script? Like, how did that go down?
Yes, we did. Yes. We showed Richard Minette as the script in which he is run over in a drunken state by a truck full of pigs.
Canada's greatest hand.
And he felt insulted and didn't want to participate.
Yeah,
he was insulted in a really, really charming way, but he was insulted. And we're saying you gotta read 4. I don't think he even read it. I think he had other people read it for him and tell him that this.
And he was quite insulted about the gift shop stuff.
He was very insulted about the gift shop. He said the gift shop is ridiculous. We don't have anything like that. We don't have Shakespeare, and like merchandise like
rings.
Yeah, and Anthony in the room said, "Well, we do have the Richard III keychains." Like in that same conversation. But anyway, they decided not to participate in the filming of Slings and Arrows. However, they grew to love the show.
So
Yeah, I
eventually.
wonder,
last
did that
time
change?
Susan and I went down, they have a huge video section, and Slings and Arrows was nowhere to be found.
Oh, really?
And I think that's where the assistant manager of one of the gift stores, because I believe there's more than one now, came up and whispered that he liked Slings and Arrows.
That is fascinating. That's hilarious. Do you think of Richard as the villain? And in what?
Question too.
No, but he's someone who lives beneath the bubble of art. He's never going to be able to penetrate it. He's kind of a bean counter. At the same time, because Geoffrey's return sort of stirs something in him that he's never going to be able to properly articulate. And of course, he winds up taking a lot of ecstasy and hanging out with young kids and feeling good in his body for the first time in his life. And that, and getting new glasses and all this sort of thing. But he'll never, he kind of gets there. He knows that something wonderful has happened, but I like the idea that artistically he has stumps for hands. So.
I know his arc is so powerful in the show because he, you were talking about people changing and that notion that you reach a sort of crisis, you can change in some direction. That's why I asked whether you think of him as a villain, because it's a show about commercialism. Like, is that where he ends up, or do you think he's still not in that space?
Commercialism, I think the first words he speaks is he's lecturing Oliver about, I wish you'd pay attention to the bottom line. And I think people who maybe don't have like a particularly higher, calling, what matters the most is loyalty. And the breach he finally has with his artistic director is over being lied to, and that's just, and he can't see the point of it.
Right.
Yeah.
What's the show's idea of good theater? Like, and what does it match with your idea of good theater? Has it changed? Like, because the show does present, it's a really beautiful presentation of what it means to live life in the theater, but it also expresses a bunch of ideas about Oliver makes a certain kind of bad theater, Darren makes a certain kind of theater that is also a problem. I wonder whether you could articulate what kind of theater the show is. It's not a thesis, it's not like supporting it, but what kind of theater the show is celebrating to some extent, like whether you could describe that thing you're going for.
In brief, I'd say Shakespeare that lives, that has true internal life, which is a really, it's a challenge that everybody who does classical theater faces. So you have to invest, you have to fully understand it and submit to its rules while making it absolutely current. That's one version, but I'll stop. Who else? Anyone?
It's a tough question. Geoffrey is constantly trying to get out of the way of the material. That's kind of his approach to it. In the first season, he ends up doing Hamlet with racks of clothing, costumes, and an open stage, which was, we actually based that on who was it again? Was it Richard Burton? Yeah, in the 60s, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that seems to be, obviously Darren Nichols is a kind of the Ivo van Hove version, which is all spectacle and horses on stage. And Oliver is like comfortable like an old shoe, is what Basil describes as just very familiar and the easy math and simple, tasteful productions, but with no heart or energy or fire. And Geoffrey is about getting to the uncomfortable truths of each moment and getting out of the way of them. I think that's kind of our philosophy, roughly.
Which is why he's still giving notes to Martha's character on the closing night.
Yes.
Yeah. Because it's not about anything other than the pure expression of how can we be better at what we do. You're never going to rest somehow.
I sort of felt like the show was a sort of addressing the impossibility of doing it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in spite of how impossible it is to conjure anything out of, the work, you still do it. And, that's why I think it speaks so much to people who work in the field, that as frustrating as it is, you kind of wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And because it's, it's a home, regardless of whether it's good or not.
and even and then with the third season, we were really thinking about like how many people, does it matter how many people see by the time, does it matter if only 10 people see it? It doesn't, you know. I think we come down on the side of it's all about the people who were there, the experience you have, the communication you have as actors with each other, with the audience. It's again, somewhat romanticized version, but it's what we aspire to.
You know, the third season is very fascinating to me because, I mean, each of the seasons is very powerful in their own way. But in the third season, Geoffrey, who's one of the central character, acts terribly, and the actors in the show really suffer because of the behavior of another actor. And I wonder, and it's actually one of the things I particularly like about the last season is that darkness of presentation. I wonder, would that go over differently now? Because there are things that are in the show that are about the endurance of people for certain kinds of abusive behavior that is paired with creative behavior. I wondered about whether your perspective on that would be different if you were making it now.
Mm. I'll speak because I know everybody has worked with really difficult people, and it is one of the things I struggle with. I struggled with at the time, I struggle with it now. Sometimes really gifted people are very difficult to work with, and do they need to be so difficult? I have no idea, but it is one of the fascinating creative problems to me. I've also worked with really nice people who are very talented, so it's not, obviously doesn't have to go hand in hand. I'd never say that. So I think in some ways we'd still be interested in the problem. I'm not sure. We might have more, there'd be more people probably who'd have something to say about it, I think. We were writing in a time about our own times when people just didn't have the language to say this isn't acceptable really, or they tried, but there wasn't enough of an echo to say, you know, you're right, it's not worth it. But so I still it continues to fascinate me because of these monsters I've worked with, but I don't know what the answer. I don't know that any of us know what the answer is yet. How to resolve that?
Well, I think because now there are many more things in place for people, you know, to supposedly to feel more comfortable in addressing abusive behavior. But remember that Ellen spoke up to Bill's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they speak up and try to help their younger.
Yeah, that was one of, like, you know, those very, like, those redeeming, you know, those one or two redeeming moments that Ellen had in the show. Like, no, she's actually a good person. Was that she kept trying to bring that problem to light.
Yeah, true.
And that as we all know, when those situations that we've all been a part of, when anyone has usually, you know, has tried to do that in the past, there's usually very effective methods to shut them down. And Ellen did keep trying. So that was like, so that in that way, that was you know, that was a good an example of, yes, you are allowed in rehearsal to tell someone to shut up if they're being abusive.
Mm-hmm. I find that last season so powerful precisely because it presents a really dysfunctional and painful situation. It doesn't glamorize it. And it has this clash between the intent to do something that really honors theater and the fact that it ends up feeling kind of poisoned in a certain way. And I actually wondered what you felt about the portrait of kind of abuse within the theater in that last season. And I wonder how that would reach.
And it's also Lear.
Yeah.
Who is.
Yes, who is
quite a horrible guy. You know, you feel sorry for him, but it's not because he's, you know, particularly admirable. I know, I think that's the thing. What I thought about, there's something about the alchemy of those writers, Mark and Bob and Susan, that is really very rare. And the strengths of each one, you can feel them all melded together in the material. That's why I say when I first read it, I was like, this is absolutely fabulous. And no one person in a way could capture it. There's something about the three of them. And I would never know, and I'm sure they can't even remember how in the course of writing that third year, that it didn't allow itself to go too far into the sort of sentimental or maudlin aspect of it. It really was going to hang into a certain reality, which is that a lot of the theater has been abusive, and a lot of, we're all going through an awful lot of kind of the readjustment of everything, long overdue. And it's funny to think of people that I quite admired when I was younger and realize that guy was actually kind of nasty, but I didn't sort of think of it at the time because we were all within a kind of frame. And I think that's something quite forward-looking in the writing of Slings and Arrows, that it was a fair bit ahead of its time in assessing, well, what's the actual base plate of what we do and what is acceptable and not acceptable. And I think, in that it captures the desire to do something great, but it's also at the expense of other people.
So I know that you had to cull things from the show as it went on. Like, what's the thing that was the hardest to give up that you had to cut out? And also, I wanted to specifically ask about one plot that I know that you had to cut, just as a critic. I know that there was going to be more about, what's his name, the critic on the show, Cyril, or no?
Basil
on the show. Like, what was it? First of all, like, what was the hardest thing to give up that you had to cut from the show? And also, what was the thing that you were going to do that was more about the relationship between critics and artists?
What was it, the helicopter tracking shot at the beginning, Mark, that broke your heart?
I'll never live this down. It's a brilliant idea that these two clowns can't appreciate, but it would have been fantastic to go from the corporate office of Toronto out the window and rapidly helicopter to Stratford for a mere, what, $200,000?
This is before drones.
Yeah.
So it would be a helicopter.
Yeah.
Who was in the helicopter?
This was written into the pilot, this long helicopter tracking shot, which was the very first thing to be cut. But
so was it like the beginning of The Apprentice, where there's like a helicopter city with like booming music, or how is that going to work? Was somebody in it?
Mark, how was that going to work?
I don't know. All I remember is it was beautiful.
The intern storyline was one that was kind of heartbreaking to really cut down, right, Mark? Remember
because that was something I think we were pushing, because I had done a theater festival in Massachusetts, and it was literally swarming with unpaid Williamstown Festival, swarming with unpaid interns. But Susan had some experience as well, and I think we got some very funny bits out of it. But
it was basically a very rich vein that would have dominated the entire season if we had really dug into it. It was almost like it could have been a spin-off series.
I think there was always an embarrassment of stories, because I remember the experience of all of us every time we sat down to try and figure out the 6th episode of every season. It was like, oh Jesus Christ, all the cars need to park at once. And I think we made some brutal cuts.
Martha and Luke, obviously you didn't cut things from the show. Like, what's your single favorite scene that you're proud of in the series?
Oh my goodness, it's been a long time since I watched it too.
I recommend it.
No, it's funny because just what Luke was talking about, what it was like to be such a young in on the show, and then also because we were talking about like what the style of theater that we all favored, or we were trying to express. I think the first time that I did a scene from Shakespeare, which was the Gertrude Hamlet scene with Luke. I can think of that and still get goosebumps, because it was the feeling of doing something as huge as Shakespeare that I'd only done on a big stage at Stratford, to have the 2 cameras close to us and the guys scurrying around to catch what we were doing. It was just like that feeling of this, like the best of Shakespeare. What you always try to do with Shakespeare is get that intimate with it, and then to realize that this was I was getting to have this really magic moment of Shakespeare in our big crazy series. So I'm going to pick that one.
Okay. How about you, Luke?
That's the same pick.
The exact same scene.
I remember that very clearly, because it was one of the times where we sort of were committing to the work in a way that, the rest of the show didn't kind of demand of us. And it felt good and exciting to do. I don't have any one thing. I don't know. I mean, that one really does stand out. All of it. I recently saw a clip from the show where Rachel and I are sitting on a bridge spitting, and somebody commented that it was really nice to see us hawking lugs, which just made me feel kind of heroic from a Canadian perspective. I was just happy that I got into that vernacular in pop culture. But yeah, the whole thing really stands out. I do. I think a lot about Peter Wellington, who directed all of the episodes, and I think that it's he had such a specific voice, and I had worked with him just prior to shooting the series, and so we had become friends, and so I had the kind of privilege of going over to his house at night and watching dailies and getting stoned and like looking at the cool angles, and there were little specific elements that I think gave the show an extra just an extra edge that felt sort of spooky, truthful. It just sort of, yeah.
So actually, I wanted to ask about Peter Wellington, because first of all, it's unusual to have one person direct an entire television series. And this is a television series that's about direction. I actually wanted to get people to gossip about people who are not on this panel, but one of them being Peter. Like, what kind of director was he? Like, how would you describe him? Because the show is partially about what it means to be a director. It's different to be a TV director, but what kind of personality or force was he, or how did he work on the set?
He was, we worked very closely in development, going through every episode in detail before he started shooting. Again, the first season was really chaotic and difficult, and there were lots of late nights, and he heroically pushed through that. And he sort of won the respect of everybody, which is something a director has to do, right? You have to win the respect of your crew and your company. There was, I guess, a little kind of parallel narrative of who is this guy, and that was going through, but he really, really pulled it off. He definitely thinks very visually. He would pan in and out of every scene, tracking in his mind how it would edit together. He worked really closely with our editor, Chris Donaldson, who's kind of a genius in his own right. Yeah, Peter, he really had a deep understanding of the entire series. He described the first 3 seasons, or the entirety of the series, I should say, in a really interesting way, which is that the first season was a music box, the second season was a Jack in the Box, and the third season was a pine box. Yeah, and no, Peter's great. He did an amazing job under very difficult circumstances.
And I think
and there was only one director, by the way, because that's the way Rhombus normally worked, as a company that primarily produced movies. In fact, I don't think they did a series before this one.
I don't think so.
Yeah, this was their first TV series.
And what I appreciate about him is he really put the story, the scripts, front and center, and he wasn't trying to make his mark. He was really featuring the story and the actors, which is what you hope for, actually, and actually not that common.
I was going to say, was he most like Oliver, Geoffrey, or Darren? It doesn't sound like this is actually a match.
Like Geoffrey sometimes.
Closer to Geoffrey.
He had a temper at times.
He had a temper, yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't describe it as a temper. He was feral.
Yeah.
Kind of brilliant.
He'll give you a temper. He'll bring out your temper.
Yeah.
Right.
There are some people who weren't present for this. Please dish and tell stories about them. What was it like working on the Darren Nichols scenes? Or tell me something about.
That was really, really difficult with Don McKellar and Darren Nichols to not just scream with laughter all the time. I don't know where he got that guy from that he plays. It's sort of a little bit of Don, but he just made me howl just scream with laughter. But I think for me, the most extraordinary experience I had on all of it was to do with Bill Hutt and the third season with Lear. Because I had seen, my mother had taken me to Stratford, I think when I was 11, and I saw one of the 4 Lears that Bill did. And I do remember thinking, I would like to be part of that world. I don't remember anything else about the production other than thinking that. So I got set off on this path. And he and I had known each other. He was very close, and Martha had worked with him, and we had been kind of, I guess, friends for many, many years, but I'd never worked with him until this show. And he was playing Lear, and it had this great circle to it. And then on top of that, he brought in the shows, he's dying. And Bill brought me into his trailer, said, you can't tell anyone else, but I am actually dying. And so, I'm sorry, it just kind of chokes me up a little bit because, I knew that all along and I couldn't really tell anybody else. And I don't imagine I'll ever have an experience quite like that again. And it was from the guy who made me want to be in it in the first place. So yeah, that was really an astonishing thing to go through.
It was incredibly touching to work with William Hutt.
Yes.
Was I think especially for you, Susan, because you actually experienced his.
I'd done Lear with him.
Yeah.
And it was never filmed, which was a sort of a crime.
Yeah.
This brilliant.
What did you play in the Lear?
I was Regan in his in Lear with him. So he is one of my icons. Martha worked with him as well, and so did Paul. So there was something very moving about us getting to work with him again. You called him Big Daddy, didn't you, Martha?
Yes. And that came because I did Lear with him as well and played Regan.
Right.
And that's Diane Dackel and Diane Dackel, who played the minister in Slings and Arrows. We called him Big Daddy.
Yeah. So there was and a lot of us had worked together of the people who came on the show. So there was a real, you rarely get that kind of, but we had a sort of instant ensemble of all the people who had worked together, and especially at Stratford. And when Bill came in, that was kind of the icing on the cake for that.
I know, it's a really beautiful final season, and it just all holds together so fantastically, just as a trilogy in this way.
Yes.
So I anybody who's watching this will want me to ask about the status of the other projects that you're working on in terms of amateurs. Is that in process? Where are things in terms of, it's a prequel, right? Please tell me anything about it. I'm very excited.
Mark, you're good at giving the haircut version.
Elevator pitch for amateurs?
Well, there was always something. It was such a pleasure to do, and I think Bob was away shoveling Tonys into his book. Susan and I went on a trip to Stratford, and we originally started looking at sort of a post season 3 arc of for Geoffrey and Martha. And then we were driving down to Stratford. This is how I remember it, Susan. And we were trying to imagine our two, orchestra Muppets commenting Frank and Cyril commenting on a trip, being young gay men heading to Stratford or to the New Burbage Festival at the beginning, and the idea that in a place like Canada there was this home, a place where they could feel welcome, where otherness would be accepted. Except, of course, we also realized that at the time Stratford was a hard luck town, because in the booming 50s it was losing its main industry, which was repairing steam locomotives. So there seemed to be a really good apposition there. And at the same time in England, there was a famous Irish director who had felt shunned, despite great success, by the establishment Shakespeare scene. And Shakespeare, by all accounts at that point, had reached its most wooden and plastic form of kind of acting. And so we thought there was a story there which kind of mirrored the real story of the festival, which is that this guy who felt unwelcome and had quit performing or directing for good would come to this town, meet this young guy, this young hero,
We've never seen a play in his life before.
Never seen a play in his life. Was an junior editor of a monthly magazine that dealt with Canadian infrastructure sewage, and had proposed, well, you know, as his town was falling apart with all these jobs being lost, why don't we have a Shakespeare parade? Because we're called Stratford. And this little germ, combined with this expat from England, blew up into this incredible thing. And we had a lot of fun inventing and also parroting, you know, the history.
So how many scripts have you written, or where is the project in terms of, is it going to get made, or?
We're still looking for partners. We have 3 scripts and 3 more outlines and a couple of seasons in our heads. And we're still looking for partners. It's tricky making something, well, you know, we got this amazing window. Who would have guessed that we would ever get Slings and Arrows made, a show about theater, about Canadian theater and about Shakespeare. And we're looking for that window to jump through again. It's a period play, it's a period show. It's very much about theater, and at the same time, it's very much about other things. It's about, you know, it's about this little town that said yes, you know, in this big way. And all the people who came there, and as we talk about those 2 characters, discovered who they were, that they could be who they were there. So it's really, to us, it's never just about theater. It's about what does, in this case, it's what does this little idea do to a town and the people who come there. It's not just about the actors. In this case, we wanted to sort of say, well, who are all the people whose lives were changed by their connection to it? So it's a big idea that we love, and we're trying to find the right partners at the moment.
Well, yeah. Like I said, I really want you to be able to make amateurs, because I'm perpetually interested in this. What you created is so beautiful. So I knew I was gonna like end up in a situation where I'm talking to you where it's just like that. I don't remember who the guy was on Saturday Night Live that used to do those ones where the whole interview is just like, you know, that scene? I really like that. So that's how
Farley.
Yeah, Chris Farley's way of interviewing artists that he admires. That's how I'm gonna end. I'll end on a Chris Farley note where I'll just say, thank you guys for making the show. I'm so glad that it's finding a new audience. I feel like it just has this, real depth and beauty. I was very startled to be so emotionally responsive to it, watching it again, because I thought I'd be watching it kind of structurally. And I don't know how it feels for you guys to watch the work. I know, Martha, you said that you hadn't watched it, but I just wanted to recommend that you all watch it. It was very good. So anyway, thank you so much for taking the time. It was wonderful talking to you, and good luck with all of the projects you're working with, and good luck with this whole insane, just global situation that has put us in tiny boxes together.
Yeah.
So
yes, and you
situation.
Thank you. Wonderful questions. Pleasure. Thank you.